As we turn our attention to the mayoralty of Mayor Eric Adams, which is coming to an end on December 31st. Earlier this morning, he gave his last official press conference. He was surrounded by some of his top elected officials and appointed officials like the police commissioner, Jessica Tisch, as well as community leaders who have supported him in his fight against gun violence, saying that has been an historic drop in gun violence as he goes out of office. He was urging his successor, Zoran Mamdani, the mayor-elect, in order to not kind of reinvent the wheel, because you see what's working. There's certain strategies that the NYPD has employed under Mayor Adams' direction of safety with justice, which was his pledge when he was first sworn in, that you could make things safer in New York City without violating people's rights. But we're going to talk about his term overall right now with Ben Max. He is the program director for the New York Law School Center for New York City law. So he knows a lot about these things. Ben, thank you so much for joining us. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Lisa.
So when you look at, let's talk about the successes. We'll focus on the positive first. When you talk about the successes of Mayor Adams and his administration, he's pointed to things like I appointed the first rat czar, and the crime was clearly the reason many people elected him. But what do you see as his biggest successes?
Yeah, I think he's got several to point to. I would put towards the top of the list housing and housing policy. He's done a lot to set the city on a path to build much needed housing and all over the city, which is important too, in places that have been building housing and places that haven't been building housing. So that's one. Another is the focus on literacy and reading education in city schools. He's worked with his schools chancellor to really overhaul how reading is taught in the youngest grades, and that's very important and much needed. Also, his focus tied into that on dyslexia screenings and education. And again, there's always room for better implementation in some of these things, but his focus and his change of policy on literacy has been very important. And then the third thing I'd note right now is the containerization of trash. He's very proud of that. It ties in with the rat situation you mentioned. And I think that that's been a big advancement for the city, moving towards getting rid of those big piles of trash bags on the sidewalks and getting them into containers. So those are a few of the top ones. I could go into a couple more if you want, but those are a few that stick out to me.
Well, Ben, let me ask you about the crime, though, because there was, he was coming off, and also while he was in the police department, and then also in other positions as elected official, as Brooklyn Borough president, as a state senator, there was the focus on crime, but this was all coming at a time New York City still under federal monitor because of racial profiling, because of that famous federal case, and that type of thing, and devising these strategies, which he did, which we reported on extensively and exclusively in some cases, of how to tackle the gun problem using data, using precision policing, which they've called. There's not too many other cities, it seems, around the country, major urban areas, that have used that same approach. What do you think about that?
I would put the general category of crime and public safety and police accountability as a mixed bag for Eric Adams. He was elected to be a public safety mayor, but as you mentioned in the intro to our conversation here, he was also promising to be someone focused on justice because he had been a critic of some police practices in the past. And he's done virtually nothing about police accountability as mayor. So I would put that into the demerits on his tenure. In terms of safety, the last 2 years of the 4 years have shown a lot of progress. The first couple were a struggle, and he even acknowledged that. So I think he's made progress on crime, which was the number one thing he was elected to do, but it's taken a little bit longer than some people thought. And one of the reasons for that is one of the biggest negatives of Eric Adams' tenure, which was some of the appointments that he made and some of the management issues that we saw.
And Ben, what about, you're talking about the appointments, there was a lot's been made of the turmoil, of the changes, the number of police commissioners, but there were a lot of other key positions that were his supporters and lifelong people that he'd worked with for many, many years in his career in public service. But in terms of the indictment, what did that, the federal indictment that is basically, I guess, shelved now, is, I don't know what the legal, you would know better than I do what the legal term is today.
It's not even shelved, it's trashed, it's gone.
It's gone.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
What damage do you think that did to him?
Well,
Eric Adams, how he handled it.
Right. I think we need to be very clear in looking back at the Eric Adams tenure that his approval ratings were in the tank before he was indicted. And that's important to remember. And part of that was because he was showing significant sort of signs of mixed leadership. He was struggling under the weight of the migrant crisis. He was not managing city government particularly well. And crime wasn't dropping in the way that voters had elected him to handle. And part of that was the fact that he appointed a first police commissioner, but then he brought in his buddies at City Hall who were undermining her, and she left after a little over a year. And then we saw more turmoil at the police department until there's been more stability under Jessica Tisch. So the indictment itself obviously made Adams' situation go from bad to worse. And he is the first sitting mayor in modern times to be indicted while in office. Even though the Trump administration made the charges go away, there's still a very big sort of cloud hanging over the mayor in terms of his ethics. And even things that didn't rise to the level of criminal charges, we've seen many issues around ethics and investigations and scandal throughout his inner circle in many ways that are a real cloud over his entire tenure.
And you're speaking of the charges against these other top aides. I mean, I don't think we've ever seen that number of top officials in any mayor's administration be facing those kind of charges and investigations. And when you see that, do all of those, now that he's leaving office, do these investigations against Ingrid Lewis Martin, who was his lifelong right hand and his top aide, top aide throughout his career, do these investigate, and her son, allegedly getting $50,000 wired to her son, based on a very suspicious arrangement, let's just say, allegedly. But do all of those charges and now all of those officials that were under investigation, do those things kind of go by the wayside, or what happens there?
Eric Adams is the only one who got his charges dismissed. Ingrid Lewis Martin is still facing her charges. She was his senior advisor in City Hall and clearly hurt him in a number of ways, even before she was charged with corruption. Some of the other charges that have been brought against his appointees, those are ongoing. And as far as I know, there's several investigations that are continuing into people that he appointed and who had to resign under the cloud of investigation. Now, those might not result in charges, but all of these other charges or investigations have been ongoing, even though the mayor was lucky enough to sort of cozy up to President Trump and his inner circle to get his charges dropped.
But let me ask you this, if any of with Ingrid Lewis Martin in particular, because she was involved very intimately in his day-to-day decision-making and policies, is there a chance that he may face, that he may face charges in relation to some other case, or could other charges be brought against him? Or do you think, okay, well, that ship has sailed, they're not going to really, who's going to go after him at this point?
It's possible that you could see charges at the state level, which would be Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg, who's bringing the case against Ingrid Lewis Martin. There's, possible charges, even civil charges that could happen at the city level. But right now, there's no indication that Mayor Adams is the target of any investigations. There's always a question whether people like Ingrid Lewis Martin or others that know the mayor very well and were privy to his decision-making could wind up cooperating with, prosecutors if they know something. But at this point, we have no reason to believe there's any further charges coming against the mayor. There was indication that there were further federal charges perhaps coming, but again, that whole case was squashed.
And what about one of the perceptions too that some people say hurt him in the very beginning was he seemed to be enamored of celebrity lifestyle and be at parties and be in, a lot of very chic places and that type of thing, and not really, this is what some community leaders have said to me in doing various stories in their neighborhoods, is that he never really built that network like Bill de Blasio did in terms of being tied in with legitimate community groups that had been there, that were making, and local elected, various city council members that had influence in their particular district. What do you think about his leadership style? And they said he felt unfocused until he started to realize, after the indictments and the administration crumbling in some places, that he really need to get back down to the job.
I think he very quickly created a perception that he was not focused on solving New Yorkers' problems. He was much more focused on his own image and his own lifestyle. And that was a real problem for him. And part of the reason, as I mentioned, that his approval numbers were really tanking well before he was indicted. If Mayor Adams wanted to sort of live it up and be a nightlife mayor and be out in the town, I think New Yorkers would have welcomed that to a large degree if they also felt like basic services were being done well, if they felt like crime was dropping, which they elected the mayor to do first and foremost, and some of those other bread and butter issues for a mayor. Now, he did have some successes, and there were definitely some things that were going well. There really weren't a lot of issues around, the school system or the sanitation department and things like that. Always room for improvement. But he really undermined himself with some of his habits and some of the ways that he, I think, came across to New Yorkers as very sort of egomaniacal and focused on his own stuff as opposed to their problems.
No, absolutely. And then any other thoughts you have on him? And then I want to just get your quick take on the incoming mayor.
Sure. I would just say, a couple of the areas where Eric Adams really failed on policy was he did very little to speed up the buses in the city, which he promised to do. And we saw Zohran Mamdani get elected on promises related to actually speeding up the buses that carry, 1.5 million or so people a day. And then I would also say, Eric Adams came into office with his second biggest focus behind crime and public safety was public health. And he did a lot on public health, but he didn't focus on it enough to be remembered as a public health mayor. And I think he wanted to do that, but he fell well short of that.
And then what about, let me ask you about the, because you mentioned it earlier, the immigrant crisis, how he handled that. He said we handled it, the city handled it very, very well. What kind of a grade do you give him on that?
Well, I would give him somewhere in the sort of B minus range. I mean, I think the city did do a lot logistically and humanitarian fashion to welcome over 200,000 people in a very short time who needed a place to stay and food and clothing, and mostly were ineligible to work. And I think the Adams administration, they made some mistakes in the logistics, but they did a lot of good work there. The problem for Eric Adams was he didn't display good public leadership around that. He was rightfully complaining that he wasn't getting more help from the federal government, but he did it in a way that was very divisive and very off-putting to a lot of New Yorkers.
No, and there are a lot of New Yorkers in the communities, in the low-income communities, saying we're not getting cash cards, we're not getting new clothes, we're not getting, free phones and some of the benefits that they were giving. Looking ahead to the incoming mayor-elect, if the city they say is much safer. Obviously, the subway still remains a problem. The problem with mentally disturbed, violent people in public places is still an issue. But what do you see as some of the things that the mayor-elect, Zohran Mamdani, really needs to be focusing on?
Well, the things you just mentioned, there's been progress, right? So he needs to continue the progress on broader safety, subway safety, and help for people with serious mental illness who are living in public places and operating in public places. And he knows that. Beyond that, he ran on an affordability agenda, and he needs to deliver on that. He needs to make the city more affordable, or at least find ways to sort of break the increasing cost of living curve in a way where it feels like it's more manageable for people. Now, that's very hard for a mayor to do. A lot of those factors are more national and international that impact the economy and inflation and cost of living. But he ran on a few top things, and he needs to deliver on those. We'll see if they're the right solutions if he delivers on them, but he needs to make the buses free and fast. He needs to get the rent freeze for the rent stabilized apartments, which again, might not be the best thing, but he needs to figure out a solution if some of those buildings are in disrepair. And he needs to advance universal childcare, which is his other big pillar of his campaign.
All right. And what about in terms of, we've heard of some of his appointments and some of the people that are coming in. What kind of people does he need to attract? Because if it's people from the Adams administration, which he doesn't seem, except for the police commissioner, that's kind of a mixed bag coming in. But what do you think what would be the key positions that he really needs to have somebody that really knows what they're doing but's open to new approaches?
Well, listen, he's got to fill out his deputy mayor roster who are so key in managing the city. He's got some solid initial appointments for deputy mayors, especially first deputy mayor Dean Foulahan is a very experienced government official. And then he needs to appoint, more commissioners to agencies who have expertise and experience, because He's the incoming mayor with very limited government experience, and I think he knows he needs very seasoned hands on the wheel at these agencies and in City Hall. And so far, so good, I'd say, on that. And we'll see. The biggest outstanding question right now, other than the other deputy mayors, is the school's chancellor and what he's going to do there. And he needs to make a very smart and careful choice there, because this is 900,000 kids in our school system who need progress. And he knows, I think, that he needs to appoint someone good there. But school's chancellor is a big management job. So it's not just about someone with education experience, which is good. It's also about someone who has a sense of how to manage the Department of Education.
And do you think that the mayor-elect will be up to the challenge? You mentioned management in the city. So many of the city departments, agencies, funding is this kind of, I've been told, and we reported on it, this kind of complex, these streams of the federal money, state money, city money, all of these various eligibility requirements and that type of thing. That in itself is daunting.
Well, listen, he appointed, again, a very veteran first deputy mayor who was a former city budget director. And then he brought in a city budget director who has a lot of government experience. So those are two very key appointments who are very experienced, very solid picks. And again, he's got to be smart about who he puts at the top of agencies like transportation and housing. These need to be people who maybe are good ideological fits for his vision, but they really need to also be experts on management and experts on the things you just got at, the funding streams, because it does all come back to money and management when you're running city government.
Exactly. The two M's. All right, Ben, thank you so much for being with us. We really appreciate it. Thanks for spending some time and breaking this all down. We're going to have plenty to have a happy new year. We're going to have plenty to talk about, I'm sure, in 2026.